If you've been told you have stenosis and you're frustrated with the results that you're getting, that you're always having to be on medications, that there's no answers for you, and you're really not living your life, then you want to make sure that you listen to this talk because we're going to talk about what stenosis is. We're going to talk about the things that can mimic stenosis. There's a lot of things out there that appear that they look like they're stenosis, but they really aren't. And we're going to talk about how we can differentiate between what it is and what it's not. Of all the years I've been doing this, 20 plus years of being a physical therapist, I've seen one case that truly was stenosis. Most of the patients that come into my office, they come in and we ask a few questions. We're like, this is not stenosis, and we're going to learn about what that is. And finally, what is an exercise that you can do that will get you some relief today? And those are the three topics that we're going to be talking about today. So stay tuned. My name is Stephanie. I am the owner of Empower Physical Therapy. And what we really truly help is we help chronic pain patients that have tried numerous failed treatments get their life back. And we do this without having them to have to go through surgery, medications, or injections. That's really what we do. And stenosis is one of those categories that is something that is chronic that people deal with all the time. So let's talk a little bit about what it is. So when you have stenosis, what it kind of happens is you have these areas in through here where the nerves come out, because you can see where the nerve is, and even in this into the spinal cord. And what happens is these areas get a little bit smaller, and that can happen from just the height of the disc starts getting a little bit more reduced as we get older. It's a normal part of aging, nothing that we really worry about. But also you get some bony changes that also can create where there's a little bit of narrowing in that space. And what people typically feel is they have this back pain that's unrelenting, and a lot of times they can have back pain when they're walking and they get just really tired and fatigued. And honestly, we see this all the time with just people that generally have back pain. And so what are some of the things that when we look at, when you go and see a doctor, the first thing they want to do is they take a picture and they'll basically show that you have stenosis, arthritis, those kind of things. I mean, it's just kind of what happens as we get older. I know I've talked about this all the time where we literally, like, as we get older, we get like wrinkles on our bone, just like we get wrinkles on our face. And that's what degenerative changes look like. That's what arthritis looks like. It's just a normal part of aging. But how do we know if your pain's actually really coming from stenosis, or is it really coming from something else? And typically when we see patients that have stenosis, typically they're super stiff. So if this is their spine, they're usually like bent forward a little bit. They can't actually extend backwards because it hurts. Very common with stenosis, but also very common if we're just a part of aging and we're just getting stiff. And how do we know the difference between, is that really what's going on, or is there something else that's going on? And we're going to get to that in here in a second. So when we have the stiffness, we're typically bent forward, and that really hurts when we start walking. So commonly what doctors think is, oh yeah, here's the picture. You're having a hard time walking. This is part of this is what happens when you have stenosis. But what happens is think about it. So if we have our disc here, and if we're constantly pushing forward on that disc, you can see how you can get some little bit of like, almost like a herniation in the back. And so if we're slightly flexed, and this material here, this disc here is kind of like gel filled, as we get older, it becomes a little bit more particle filled. And what happens is that gel will tend to migrate to the back, and then it creates a lot of stiffness. So then we have a lot of stiffness being able to like reverse and go into extension to be able to extend backwards. And that's really common as we get older, because what do we do throughout the day? We're sitting more often, especially as we get older, whether we're in front of the computer or in front of the TV, we're not as active as we want to be a lot of times. And so then we start having all that material in the back go to the back of the disc, and it stiffens those joints to where we start looking like we're like this, where our body's a little bit more forward. We can't actually extend backwards. And so when we start asking questions like, tell me a little bit about how your body responds, like when you're sitting. And if they say, oh, I get worse when I sit. Awesome. That is not stenosis. That is something that is not common to have having issues when you have stenosis, because when we sit, what happens is we flex and we open up this space. So if it were really stenosis, these nerves and everything are going to be way more free and open. But when it's more that it's like the disc that's related, where you have material that's being pushed back, that's really common when you're to hurt when you're sitting. And so that's one of the things where we can almost rule this out immediately, is that, oh, wait, that doesn't sound like it's stenosis. Or when they say things like, tell me what happens when you start walking. Well, when I first start walking, it hurts. But as I keep on going, it gets a little bit better. I feel a little bit better. That's not stenosis. When we walk, what happens is we're doing little mini extensions in our back. And so if we are doing little mini extensions, because when we walk and we bring a leg forward, we're doing a little bit where the back actually moves like this. The back loves being moved like this, which is why you typically feel a little bit better as you keep on walking. And so as we're moving like this, we're doing little mini extensions. Well, if we were really clamping down and doing little mini extensions on these, the space here, the space gets smaller when you go back into extension. That makes this worse. So you should typically feel worse as you keep on walking. Now, there are cases that we see when patients come into our office where they literally will be bent so far forward that they don't ever get any kind of relief with walking. So we just have to figure out, is it really stenosis that's causing their issues or not? And we can still ask them questions like, the sitting piece of it. If the sitting still makes them get worse, it's not stenosis. The stenosis does not present that way. So those are the big questions that you can start asking yourself. If you're noticing that, man, I'm having issues when I'm sitting, and not stenosis. You should feel better. That's usually what we tell people to do. When you hurt, go ahead and sit down, because you're going to open up that space in the back, which is going to open up where the nerves and the spinal cord is. And so it's going to actually feel better. But when you, if you get up and you start walking and you're stiff, very normal, but as you walk, you start feeling better. Again, that's not stenosis. So it goes to my last piece of this. So what can you do to start getting some relief today? The biggest thing you can do is, and what I usually tell patients is, we've got to start working on bending backwards. And so I have them go up against a counter. So you're going to lean back against the counter. Your back is actually going to be against like a counter. And what you're going to do is you're going to start bending backwards. Just little mini bending backwards, just bending backwards. So we're just doing, like, if this were the counter, you're just bending backwards a little bit and then coming back up, and bending backwards a little bit and then coming back up. We're monitoring our symptoms. If we're noticing that, I'm a little stiff as I do it, I don't really worry about that. Keep on going. And as you start noticing that maybe the first round you're pretty stiff, if you don't notice any differences, like everything feels like back to where it was, it's not worse, you just might be like, oh, I felt like I did something, then do another round. And a lot of times that second round, you're going to start noticing that it gets a little bit looser and you're able to do a little bit more. These are common things. So we need to start increasing that mobility so that your back can be in a normal resting position. The joints like being in its normal resting position. They don't like being where they're, super flexed like this. It puts pressure on the wrong parts of the areas, and our body does not like that at all. So we need to make sure that we want to stand straight up so that our joints look like this, so that they can kind of take the load evenly, not take the load where there's more pressure on one part of that disc, if that makes sense. So we want to make sure that we get our body back to being able to straighten up, and then eventually where you can actually extend backwards a little bit more, so you can really start moving the material in the back away from the area to redistribute everything, to keep it where everything is more centered. And so that's the exercise that you can do. And doing that, every couple of hours, 8 to 10 of them, you'll start noticing that you'll start feeling better each day. Make sure, if you notice that you aren't feeling better or that your symptoms are getting worse, then you need to make sure that you get to someone that understands what's going on, because you could be doing too much too soon. There could be some other things that need to be addressed in there that are just way more complicated than we can actually go in this talk today. But definitely get with a specialist so they can really figure out what's going on, because I'm here to tell you, it is possible to get your life back, even when you've had this for long periods of time. We see it all the time. So that is my how you can start getting some relief today. If you have been given the diagnosis of stenosis, make sure you follow us for more content like this as we put stuff out on a weekly basis.